A young boy from Phoenix, Arizona, began having violent reactions every time the television turned on in his family's new home. His screams would echo through the house, leaving his mother desperate for answers. But when she decided to record one of these episodes to show their therapist, she discovered something in the background that would uncover a 3-year-old mystery and change their lives forever. Sarah Martinez pressed her palms against her temples, feeling the familiar throb of another headache building behind her eyes. The digital clock on the microwave read 3:47 p.m., which meant Marcus would be home from school in 20 minutes. 20 minutes to prepare herself for another afternoon of potential chaos. She moved through their modest 2-story home in the Ahwatukee neighborhood, checking that all the televisions were turned off. It had become a ritual over the past 3 weeks since they'd moved in, a desperate attempt to maintain some semblance of peace in their already fragile world. The house had seemed perfect when they'd first toured it 6 months ago. 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, a spacious backyard with a swing set that the previous owners had left behind. The price was almost too good to be true for the area, but the realtor had explained that the sellers were motivated to close quickly. Sarah hadn't questioned it too deeply. She'd needed a fresh start after David's death, somewhere new where every corner didn't remind her of her late husband. The front door slammed shut, and Sarah's shoulders tensed automatically. "Mom, I'm home!" Marcus's voice carried through the entryway, still holding that innocent enthusiasm that 8-year-olds possessed, despite everything he'd been through. "In the kitchen, sweetheart," Sarah called back, forcing brightness into her voice. Marcus appeared in the doorway, his backpack sliding off one shoulder. His dark hair was tousled from the October wind, and his cheeks were flushed from the walk home. He looked so much like David in moments like these. The same warm brown eyes, the same way of tilting his head when he was thinking about something. "How was school?" Sarah asked, ruffling his hair as he dropped his backpack on one of the kitchen chairs. "Good. Mrs. Peterson said I did really well on my math test." He paused, glancing toward the living room. "Is the TV off?" The question hit Sarah like a small punch to the chest. No 8-year-old should have to ask that question when coming home from school. No child should associate television, something that was supposed to be entertaining, comforting, with fear. "Yes, baby, everything's off." Marcus nodded, visibly relaxing. "Can I have a snack?" "Of course." "Apple slices and peanut butter? With the crunchy kind?" Sarah smiled genuinely for the first time that day. "Is there any other kind worth eating?" As she prepared his snack, Sarah watched Marcus settle at the kitchen table with his homework. This was how their afternoons went now, confined to the kitchen and his bedroom, avoiding the living room where the main television sat like some kind of malevolent presence. It had started 3 weeks ago, on their first night in the house. Sarah had been unpacking boxes in the kitchen, while Marcus played in the living room. She'd turned on the evening news for background noise, something she'd done countless times in their old apartment. But the moment the television had flickered to life, Marcus's scream had pierced through the house like a siren. She'd found him pressed against the far wall, tears streaming down his face, his small body shaking with terror. When she'd turned off the TV, he'd gradually calmed down, but he couldn't explain what had frightened him. "It hurts," was all he'd managed to say between sobs. The sounds hurt. Sarah had assumed it was grief manifesting in a new way. Marcus had been in the car when David died. He'd survived the crash that had taken his father, walking away with only minor cuts and bruises, while David had been pronounced dead at the scene. The therapist they'd been seeing, Dr. Amanda Chen, had warned that trauma could surface in unexpected ways, especially after a major change like moving to a new house. But it kept happening. Every time a television turned on, not just the living room TV, but the small one in Sarah's bedroom, even the tablet when Marcus tried to watch cartoons, he would have the same reaction. Screaming, crying, pressing his hands over his ears as if trying to block out some unbearable sound. "Mom?" Marcus's voice brought her back to the present. He was looking at her with concern, his math worksheet forgotten. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart, just thinking." She set the plate of apple slices in front of him. "Dr. Chen wants to see us again tomorrow. She has some new ideas that might help." Marcus nodded solemnly, dunking an apple slice in peanut butter. "Will she want me to try watching TV again?" The last session had been particularly difficult. Dr. Chen had suggested exposure therapy, gradually reintroducing Marcus to television in a controlled environment. They'd started with the TV on mute, and even that had triggered a mild panic response. When they'd turned the volume up to barely audible levels, Marcus had bolted from the room. "We'll take it slow," Sarah said. "No pressure." That evening, after Marcus had gone to bed, Sarah found herself standing in the living room, staring at the 55-inch smart TV mounted on the wall. It was the one luxury she'd allowed herself when they'd moved. David had always wanted a big screen for watching football games. Now it felt like a cruel irony. She picked up the remote, hesitating. Maybe if she could understand what was triggering Marcus's reactions, she could help him work through it. Dr. Chen had mentioned that recording his episodes might provide insight into the specific triggers. Sarah pulled out her phone and opened the video recording app. She positioned herself where she could capture both the TV screen and the area where Marcus typically stood when he had his episodes. Then she turned on the television. The familiar NBC News jingle filled the room as the evening broadcast began. Sarah waited, watching the screen and listening intently. The anchors discussed local politics, a traffic update, the weather forecast. Nothing seemed unusual or particularly disturbing. She was about to turn it off when she heard footsteps on the stairs. "Mom?" Marcus's voice was small, uncertain. Sarah spun around to find him standing at the bottom of the staircase in his dinosaur pajamas, his face already pale with anxiety. "Marcus, go back upstairs, honey, I was just—" But it was too late. The commercial break had ended, and a new segment was beginning. The moment the anchor's voice resumed, Marcus let out a blood-curdling scream. Sarah's phone, still recording, captured everything. Marcus's hands flew to his ears, his face contorting in what looked like physical pain. He dropped to his knees, sobbing, rocking back and forth. "Turn it off. Please, Mom, turn it off. They're screaming." Sarah fumbled for the remote, her hands shaking as she jabbed at the power button. The screen went black, and Marcus's cries gradually subsided into quiet whimpers. She rushed to him, pulling him into her arms. "It's off, baby. It's off. You're safe. They were screaming, Mom. Didn't you hear them screaming?" Sarah's blood ran cold. Who was screaming, Marcus? "The people in the TV. They were so scared. They were calling for help, but nobody could hear them except me." Sarah held her son tighter, her mind racing. There had been no screaming on the news broadcast. She'd been listening carefully, and there had been nothing but the standard evening news content. After she'd gotten Marcus back to bed, Sarah sat in the kitchen with her laptop and her phone. Her hands were still trembling slightly as she plugged in her earbuds and opened the video she'd recorded. She watched herself turn on the TV, saw Marcus appear on the stairs, witnessed his terrifying breakdown. But this time she listened with the volume turned up high, straining to hear anything that might have triggered his reaction. At first, there was nothing. Just the news anchors, the commercial jingles, the standard audio that she remembered from the live experience. But then, as she replayed the segment that had triggered Marcus's breakdown, she caught something. It was faint, almost imperceptible beneath the main audio track. Sarah rewound the recording and listened again, this time with the volume at maximum. There it was, barely audible, like voices bleeding through static. She couldn't make out words, but there was definitely something there, something that sounded like pleading, crying. Sarah felt her heart begin to race. She grabbed her laptop and imported the video file, opening it in an audio editing program that David had installed years ago for a podcast project he'd never finished. She isolated the audio track and began boosting the levels, filtering out the main broadcast audio to focus on the background noise. What she heard made her blood turn to ice. Underneath the news broadcast, so faint that most people would never notice it, were voices, multiple voices, overlapping and desperate, and among them, clear as day once she'd enhanced the audio, were the words that made her stomach clench with terror. "Help us, please, someone help us." Sarah's hands flew to her mouth as she stared at the audio waveform on her screen. The voices were there. Marcus had been right. There were people screaming, people calling for help, buried in the television broadcast. But that was impossible. How could voices be embedded in a live news broadcast? How could her 8-year-old son hear something that sophisticated audio equipment could barely detect? Sarah replayed the enhanced audio 3 more times, each playthrough confirming what she already knew but couldn't quite accept. The voices were real, they were human, and they were desperate. She looked at the clock. 11:43 p.m. Too late to call Dr. Chen, Too late to call anyone who might have rational explanations for what she'd discovered. But sleep would be impossible now. Instead, Sarah spent the next 3 hours researching everything she could about audio anomalies, broadcast interference, and the previous owners of their house. By the time the sun began to rise over Phoenix, she had discovered something that made her question everything about their seemingly perfect new home. The family who had lived there before them, the Hendricks family, had disappeared without a trace 3 years ago. Parents Michael and Jennifer Hendricks, along with their 6-year-old daughter Emma and 4-year-old son Tyler, had vanished from their home on a Tuesday morning in March 2016. Their cars were still in the driveway, their beds were unmade as if they'd just gotten up, and the coffee maker was still warm when police arrived for a welfare check requested by Michael's employer. The case had gone cold within 6 months. No evidence of foul play, no financial troubles, no history of mental illness or domestic violence. The Hendricks family had simply disappeared. Sarah stared at the family photo she'd found in an old news article about the disappearance. Michael Hendricks had worked as a sound engineer for a local radio station. He would have had access to sophisticated audio equipment, knowledge of broadcasting frequencies, and the technical skills to what? To somehow embed voices in television broadcasts 3 years after his death? Sarah shook her head, trying to dispel the increasingly irrational thoughts. There had to be a logical explanation. Equipment malfunction, interference from nearby radio towers, some kind of audio bleeding from another source. But as she looked at the enhanced audio waveform still displayed on her laptop screen, she couldn't shake the feeling that Marcus was hearing something that everyone else was missing. Something that might be connected to the family who had lived in their house before them. Something that might explain why a perfectly good house in a desirable neighborhood had been sold so quickly and cheaply. The sound of Marcus's footsteps on the stairs interrupted her thoughts. Sarah quickly closed the laptop and turned to greet her son with what she hoped was a normal smile. "Morning, sweetheart. You're up early." Marcus rubbed his eyes, his hair sticking up at odd angles. "I had bad dreams about the voices." Sarah's forced smile faltered. "What did they say in your dream?" "They were asking for help. They said their names, but I couldn't remember them when I woke up." Marcus climbed onto the chair next to her. "Mom, why can only I hear them?" Sarah pulled her son into her lap, her mind racing with questions she couldn't begin to answer. "I don't know, baby, but we're going to figure it out." As she held Marcus close, Sarah made a decision. She was going to get to the bottom of whatever was happening in their house. She was going to find out who those voices belonged to and why her son was the only one who could hear their desperate pleas for help. She had no idea that her investigation would uncover a 3-year-old crime, expose a dangerous criminal operation, and ultimately provide justice for a family who had been silenced forever. But first, she needed to understand why Marcus could hear what no one else could hear. And that meant learning more about the previous owners of their home, the Hendricks family, who had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only their desperate voices echoing through time. Sarah spent the morning researching audio interference and broadcast anomalies, but every technical explanation fell short of what she discovered. The voices were too clear, too human, too desperate to be simple equipment malfunction. As Marcus sat at the kitchen table eating cereal, carefully avoiding looking toward the living room, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She was going to systematically document these mysterious transmissions. "Marcus, honey, I need to ask you something important," Sarah said, sitting across from him at the kitchen table. "When you hear the voices on TV, do they always happen at the same time?" Marcus looked up from his bowl, milk dripping from his spoon. "What do you mean? I mean, is it during the same TV shows or at specific times of day?" Marcus thought for a moment, his 8-year-old face scrunched in concentration. "It's usually when the news is on, the evening news and sometimes the morning one, but not always." He paused. "And sometimes during other shows, but not as much." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. If there was a pattern, that might help explain what was happening. "Can you remember which shows?" "The cooking show that comes on after cartoons sometimes, and that game show you like, the one with the spinning wheel." Marcus set down his spoon. "Mom, why are you asking? Are you going to make me watch TV again?" "No, baby. I promise I won't make you do anything that scares you. I'm just trying to understand what's happening so I can help." After Marcus left for school, Sarah spent the day preparing. She set up her phone to record, positioned her laptop to capture audio, and created a schedule of when she would monitor different channels. If these voice transmissions followed a pattern, she was going to find it. At 3:30 p.m., she started with the local news channel, where she'd first detected the voices. For the first 20 minutes, everything seemed normal. Weather updates, traffic reports, local politics, standard afternoon programming with nothing unusual in the audio. Then at 3:52 p.m., during a commercial break for a local car dealership, Sarah heard it again. This time she was ready. She had the audio recording equipment set up properly, multiple devices capturing the sound from different angles. As the faint voices began bleeding through the commercial audio, Sarah enhanced the recording in real time. "Can anyone hear us? Please, we're trapped." Sarah's hands flew across the laptop keyboard, adjusting audio levels and filtering background noise. The voices became clearer, more distinct. "Been so long, so Emma is scared. Tyler won't stop crying." Emma, Tyler. Sarah's blood ran cold as she recognized the names of the Hendricks children from the missing persons report she'd read the night before. "Michael, are you there? The door won't open. We can't get out." Sarah's recording captured nearly 3 minutes of these desperate transmissions before they faded back into normal commercial audio. Her hands were shaking as she saved the files and began the process of cleaning up the audio for analysis. When Marcus came home from school, Sarah was still hunched over her laptop, headphones on, replaying the enhanced recordings. She'd managed to isolate at least 7 distinct voices from the transmission, 2 adult voices that could be Michael and Jennifer Hendricks, 2 smaller voices that matched the ages of their children, and 3 others she couldn't identify. "Mom?" Marcus touched her shoulder, making her jump. "Oh, Marcus, I didn't hear you come in." Sarah quickly pulled off her headphones and closed the laptop. "You were listening to them, weren't you? The voices from the TV." Sarah hesitated. How much should she tell him? He was only 8, but he was also the key to understanding what was happening. "Yes, I was. Marcus, you were right. There are voices in the TV broadcasts. I can hear them now too, but I had to use special equipment." Marcus nodded as if this wasn't surprising news. "They're the same voices every time, the Sad family." "The Sad family? That's what I call them. There's a mom and dad and 2 kids and some other people. They're all really scared and they keep asking for help." Marcus climbed onto the chair next to her. "Can you help them, Mom?" Sarah looked at her son, this little boy who had somehow become a conduit for voices that technology could barely detect. "I'm going to try, sweetheart, but I need to understand more about what's happening first." That evening, after Marcus had gone to bed, Sarah continued her investigation. She monitored television broadcasts from 6 p.m. to midnight, recording everything and analyzing the audio for anomalies. The pattern she discovered was both fascinating and terrifying. The voice transmissions occurred during specific time slots on specific channels, but not every day. They seemed to be strongest during local news broadcasts and certain commercial breaks, particularly ads for local businesses. The voices always included the same core group, the family of 4 that matched the Hendricks family description, but sometimes included additional voices that were harder to identify. Most disturbing of all, the transmissions seemed to be getting stronger. The voices that had been barely detectable a week ago were now clear enough that Sarah could make out individual words without enhancement. By 2 a.m., Sarah had compiled nearly 6 hours of voice recordings. She'd created transcripts of the clearest transmissions, and what she read made her stomach clench with horror. Day 847. Still trapped. No one can hear us, except Jennifer. Save your strength. The battery won't last much longer. Daddy, I'm hungry. When can we go home? Someone's coming. Hide the equipment. They can't know we're still... Sarah stared at the transcripts, her mind reeling. Day 847. If these recordings were somehow from the Hendricks family and they'd disappeared 3 years ago, that timeline could actually match. But how was it possible? How could voices from 3 years ago be bleeding into current television broadcasts? She thought about Michael Hendricks's job as a sound engineer. He would have known about radio frequencies, broadcasting equipment, emergency transmitters. If he and his family had been trapped somewhere with access to broadcasting equipment, could they have somehow created these transmissions before what? Before they died? Were these the last desperate communications of a family that had been trapped somewhere, slowly dying while trying to call for help? Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message, startling her out of her dark thoughts. It was from Dr. Chen, their therapist. "Sarah, I've been thinking about Marcus's case. There have been rare instances of children with exceptional auditory sensitivity being able to detect sounds that adults cannot. I'd like to schedule some hearing tests. Could we meet tomorrow afternoon?" Exceptional auditory sensitivity. Sarah had been so focused on the mystery of the voices that she hadn't considered the possibility that Marcus's ability to hear them might be a neurological phenomenon rather than something supernatural. She typed back, "Yes, let's meet. I have some recordings I'd like to show you." The next morning, Sarah made a decision that went against every maternal instinct she had. She was going to ask Marcus to help her map the voice transmissions more precisely. "Marcus, I need your help with something important," she said as they sat at the breakfast table. "But I want you to know that you can say no if it's too scary." Marcus looked up from his toast, suddenly serious. "Is it about the Sad family?" "Yes. I think the voices you're hearing might be people who need help, real people who are in trouble. But I need to understand when and where these voices are coming from. You want me to listen to the TV again? Not watch it, just listen. And only for a few minutes at a time. I'll be right there with you and we'll turn it off the moment you want to stop." Marcus considered this for a long moment. "If it helps the Sad family, I'll try." That afternoon, with Dr. Chen present to monitor Marcus's stress levels, they began a careful process of mapping the voice transmissions. Marcus sat in the living room with his back to the television, his hands ready to cover his ears at the first sign of distress. Sarah turned on the local news channel and waited. For the first 15 minutes, Marcus remained calm. Then, during a commercial break, his posture changed. "They're starting," he whispered. "The mum is crying." Sarah checked her recording equipment while Dr. Chen made notes about Marcus's physical responses. His breathing had quickened slightly, but he wasn't showing signs of panic. "Can you tell me what they're saying?" Sarah asked gently. Marcus closed his eyes, concentrating. "The mum is saying, she's saying, day 851, we're still here, the children are getting weaker. If anyone can hear this, she's really sad, Mum." Sarah's enhanced recording equipment captured the transmission, but even with all her audio processing, she could only make out fragments of what Marcus was hearing clearly. "The dad is talking now," Marcus continued. "He's saying something about someone named Vincent. He's angry. He's saying, 'Vincent, if you can hear this, we know what you did. We have proof.'" Dr. Chen looked up sharply from her notes. "Marcus, can you hear the name clearly? Vincent?" "Yes. The dad keeps saying Vincent. He's really mad at Vincent." Sarah felt her heart racing. This wasn't just a family calling for help. They were accusing someone named Vincent. The session continued for another 10 minutes before Marcus asked them to turn off the television. He'd provided them with the most detailed transcript yet of the mysterious transmissions, and what he'd heard was chilling. After Dr. Chen left, promising to research auditory sensitivity conditions and schedule proper hearing tests, Sarah sat alone with her laptop, staring at the notes from the session. The Hendricks family, if that's who these voices truly belonged to, had been trapped somewhere for over 850 days. They had children with them who were getting weaker, and they had some kind of proof against someone named Vincent. Sarah opened a new browser window and began searching for any connection between the name Vincent and the Hendricks family disappearance. What she found made her realize that their situation was far more dangerous than she'd imagined. Vincent Russo was a local businessman who owned several commercial properties in Phoenix, including the building that housed the radio station where Michael Hendricks had worked. According to public records, Russo had been questioned briefly after the Hendricks family disappearance, but had been cleared due to a solid alibi. However, digging deeper into local news archives, Sarah found something interesting. 6 months before the Hendricks family disappeared, Michael Hendricks had filed a complaint with the FCC about illegal radio transmissions interfering with the station's broadcasts. The complaint had mentioned suspicions about unauthorized use of radio frequencies for potential criminal communication. Sarah's blood ran cold as the pieces began falling into place. What if Michael Hendricks had stumbled onto something bigger than simple FCC violations? What if he'd discovered that someone was using illegal radio frequencies for criminal purposes, and that discovery had led to his family's disappearance? And what if that family was still alive somewhere, trapped and using Michael's technical knowledge to broadcast desperate pleas for help on frequencies that only someone with exceptional hearing, like Marcus, could detect. Sarah looked toward the stairs, where Marcus was presumably doing homework in his room. Her 8-year-old son wasn't just hearing phantom voices, he was receiving live transmissions from a family that had been missing for 3 years, a family that might still be alive, a family that had proof against someone named Vincent Russo. Sarah reached for her phone to call the police, then hesitated. What was she going to tell them? That her son could hear voices in television broadcasts that sophisticated equipment could barely detect, that a missing family was somehow broadcasting from wherever they were being held. She needed more evidence. She needed to understand exactly how these transmissions were reaching their television, and she needed to figure out where they were coming from. But first, she needed to make sure that Vincent Russo didn't know that someone was finally hearing the Hendricks family's desperate calls for help. As Sarah began planning her next steps, she had no idea that her investigation had already attracted attention from someone who had spent 3 years ensuring that the Hendricks family's voices would never be heard. Someone who was about to discover that a little boy with exceptional hearing had become the key to exposing a carefully hidden crime. Detective Maria Santos was skeptical when Sarah first called, but agreed to meet after Sarah mentioned she had new evidence related to the Hendricks disappearance. They arranged to meet at a coffee shop near the police station, neutral territory, where Sarah could present her case without feeling like she was being interrogated. Detective Santos was a woman in her early 40s with sharp eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She'd been with the Phoenix PD for 18 years and had worked missing persons cases that haunted her long after the files were closed. The Hendricks case was one of those. "Mrs. Martinez, I have to be honest with you," Detective Santos said as they settled into a corner booth. "We investigated the Hendricks disappearance thoroughly. We looked at Vincent Russo. We looked at Michael Hendricks' work at the radio station. We followed every lead. There just wasn't enough evidence to support any criminal activity." Sarah had prepared for this skepticism. She pulled out her laptop and a folder of printed documents. "Detective, what if I told you that the Hendricks family has been trying to communicate for 3 years, but no one could hear them until now? I'd say that sounds impossible." "That's what I thought too." Sarah opened her laptop and pulled up the enhanced audio recordings. "But my son has an unusual ability to detect sounds that most people can't hear, and what he's been hearing is this." Sarah played the clearest recording she'd captured, Jennifer Hendricks's voice saying, "Day 856, we're still here. The children are getting weaker. If anyone can hear this, please help us." Detective Santos leaned forward, her expression changing from skepticism to intense focus. "When was this recorded?" 3 days ago. "But Detective, there's more." Sarah played additional recordings, including the transmissions where the voices mentioned Vincent Russo by name and referenced having proof of his criminal activities. For the next hour, Sarah walked Detective Santos through everything she'd discovered: the voice transmissions, the connection to Vincent Russo, the building with the red sign, and the timeline that suggested the Hendricks family had been held captive for over 850 days. "This is..." Detective Santos paused, clearly struggling to process the information. "Mrs. Martinez, if what you're telling me is true, this would be one of the most sophisticated kidnapping cases I've ever encountered. But I have to ask, how do we know these recordings are genuine? Audio can be manipulated, voices can be synthesized." Sarah had anticipated this question too. "Detective, my 8-year-old son has been having panic attacks every time we turn on the television. He's been hearing these voices for weeks, describing details about the Hendricks family that he couldn't possibly know, details that match the missing persons reports." She showed Detective Santos her transcripts of Marcus's reports, including information about Emma and Tyler's personalities, Jennifer's background as a teacher, and Michael's technical expertise, all information that hadn't been widely reported in the media. "There's something else," Sarah continued. "I think Michael Hendricks left evidence hidden in our house. My son mentioned that the voices sometimes reference equipment and recordings. If Hendricks was as paranoid as his co-workers described, he might have created multiple backup systems for his evidence." Detective Santos was quiet for a long moment, studying the documents Sarah had provided. "Mrs. Martinez, I'm going to be straight with you. What you're describing sounds impossible, but the details you've provided are consistent with information that wasn't released to the public, information that only the investigation team and the family would know. So you believe me? I believe something unusual is happening, and I believe it's worth investigating. Detective Santos closed the folder, but we need to be very careful. If Vincent Russo is involved in this, and if he suspects that someone is receiving these transmissions, then you and your son could be in danger. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. What do you think we should do? First, we need to search your house for this hidden equipment. If Michael Hendricks did leave evidence behind, it could be the key to building a case against Russo. Second, we need to verify the location where you think the family is being held. And third, we need to do all of this without alerting Russo that we're onto him. That afternoon, while Marcus was safely at his cousin's house in Tucson, Detective Santos arrived at Sarah's home with a small team that included a tech specialist and a K9 unit trained to detect electronic devices. We're looking for anything that might be broadcasting or receiving radio signals, Detective Santos explained as the team began their search. Hidden transmitters, recording equipment, anything that might explain how these voice transmissions are reaching your house. The search started in the obvious places, the basement, the attic, closets where equipment might be concealed, but it was the K9 that made the first significant discovery. The dog, a German shepherd named Rex, became agitated in Sarah's bedroom, scratching at the wall behind her dresser. When the tech specialist moved the furniture and examined the wall, he found a section of drywall that had been carefully cut and replaced. There's definitely something behind here, the specialist said, running his hands along the edges of the concealed panel. This was professional work, someone who knew what they were doing. When they removed the panel, Sarah gasped at what was revealed. Hidden inside the wall was a sophisticated array of electronic equipment, radio transmitters, recording devices, computer servers, and monitoring equipment that looked like something from a spy movie. "This is incredible," the tech specialist whispered, shining his flashlight into the hidden compartment. "This is a complete surveillance and communication system. It's been running continuously. Look at these power indicators." Detective Santos joined them at the wall opening. "Can you tell what it's been doing? Give me a few minutes to analyze this." The specialist began carefully examining the equipment. "This looks like a multi-frequency monitoring system. It's been recording and analyzing radio transmissions across multiple bands simultaneously. And this," he pointed to a device Sarah didn't recognize. "This is an automatic relay system. It's been taking incoming transmissions and rebroadcasting them through various output sources." "Including the television?" Sarah asked. "Including the television, radio speakers, anything with an audio output in this house. The system has been configured to boost and relay specific frequencies that would normally be too weak to detect." Detective Santos looked at Sarah with a mixture of amazement and concern. "Michael Hendricks didn't just hide evidence in your house. He turned it into a relay station for emergency broadcasts. If his family was ever in trouble, they could reach this equipment and their transmissions would be amplified and broadcast through every audio device in the house. That's why Marcus could hear them," Sarah realized. "The voices weren't just background interference. They were being actively broadcast through our television and other devices." The tech specialist continued his analysis. "There's more. This system has been logging and recording every transmission it receives. We're looking at 3 years of continuous recordings." He connected a laptop to one of the devices. "If the Hendricks family has been broadcasting from wherever they're being held, every word is documented here." For the next 2 hours, the team worked to extract and analyze the recordings stored in Michael Hendricks's hidden system. What they found was a complete audio diary of 3 years in captivity. The earliest recordings from March 2016 captured the family's initial confusion and fear as they realized they'd been kidnapped. Michael's voice, professional even in crisis, documented their location, a concrete basement with no windows, their captors, Vincent Russo and at least 2 associates, and the reason for their abduction, Michael's investigation into Russo's illegal broadcasting operation. As the recordings progressed through months and then years, they painted a horrifying picture of a family struggling to survive in captivity, while Michael used his technical skills to maintain contact with the outside world, hoping someone would eventually hear their calls for help. The most recent recordings were the most disturbing. Jennifer's voice, weak and desperate, talking about the children's declining health. Michael discussing their dwindling supplies and his fear that Russo was planning to move them to a more remote location. And then, just 2 days ago, a recording that made Detective Santos immediately reach for her radio. Day 8:57. Vincent came to see us again today. He's found out that someone is receiving our transmissions. He's moving us tomorrow night to the warehouse in Scottsdale. If anyone is listening to this, please. We're running out of time. The children can't survive much longer. This might be our last transmission from this location. Detective Santos was already calling for backup as the tech specialist enhanced the most recent recordings. We need a tactical team at the Russo Properties building on Industrial Boulevard immediately, and we need surveillance on all of Russo's other properties in case they're planning to move the family. Sarah felt her heart pounding as she realized the implications. Detective, if they're moving the family tomorrow night, that's tonight. We might be too late. Not if we can help it. Detective Santos was coordinating with multiple teams through her radio. Mrs. Martinez, I need you to stay here with the technical team and continue monitoring these transmissions. If the family broadcasts again, we need to know immediately. As Detective Santos prepared to leave for the rescue operation, Sarah grabbed her arm. Detective, what about Marcus? Is he safe? He's safer in Tucson than he would be here. Vincent Russo knows that someone in this house has been receiving the transmissions. If this operation goes wrong... She didn't finish the sentence, but Sarah understood. Sarah spent the next 4 hours in her kitchen, listening to radio chatter as multiple police teams positioned themselves around Russo's properties. The tech specialist had set up equipment to monitor all frequencies that the Hendricks family had used for their broadcasts, hoping to provide real-time communication support for the rescue operation. At 9:23 p.m., Sarah's heart nearly stopped when a new transmission came through the hidden relay system. It was Michael Hendricks' voice, weaker than she'd ever heard it, but unmistakably urgent. This is Michael Hendricks broadcasting on emergency frequency 14.205. We are being moved tonight. Current location is basement level, building 47 Industrial Boulevard. Vincent Russo, 2 associates armed, family of 4 plus 3 other prisoners. Jennifer and the children are in critical condition. If anyone receives this transmission, we are running out of time. Sarah immediately relayed the information to Detective Santos, who confirmed that tactical teams were already in position around the Industrial Boulevard building. But the mention of 3 other prisoners was new information that changed the scope of the rescue operation. Detective, Sarah said into her radio, he said there are 3 other prisoners besides his family. This is bigger than we thought. Copy that. We're going in now. The next 30 minutes were the longest of Sarah's life. She sat in her kitchen, listening to radio chatter and praying that the rescue team would reach the Hendricks family in time. The voices that had haunted her house for weeks, the desperate pleas for help that only her son could clearly hear, were about to be silenced one way or another. At 10:15 p.m., Detective Santos's voice crackled through the radio with the words Sarah had been praying to hear. We have them. 7 prisoners recovered alive, including the Hendricks family. Suspect Vincent Russo and 2 associates in custody, medical teams en route. Sarah collapsed into her kitchen chair, tears streaming down her face. After 3 years of captivity, 857 days of desperate broadcasts that no one could hear, the Hendricks family was finally free. And it was all because her 8-year-old son had the remarkable ability to hear voices that sophisticated equipment could barely detect. Voices that had been calling for help from a concrete basement with no windows, waiting for someone, anyone, to finally listen. The hidden room behind Sarah's bedroom wall had been Michael Hendricks's gift to his family, a lifeline that had sustained them through 3 years of unimaginable horror and ultimately led to their rescue. As Sarah sat in her kitchen, surrounded by electronic equipment and evidence of a crime that had finally been solved, she realized that their house would never be the same. But for the first time since they'd moved in, she felt truly safe. The voices were finally silent. The desperate pleas for help had been answered, and somewhere in a Phoenix hospital, a family was being reunited with the world they'd been taken from 3 years ago. 3 weeks after the rescue, Sarah sat in the waiting room of Phoenix Children's Hospital, watching Marcus color in a dinosaur coloring book while they waited for his appointment with Dr. Chen. The therapy sessions had taken on a completely different tone since the night that changed everything. Marcus was no longer the frightened little boy who screamed when televisions turned on. The voices that had tormented him for weeks were gone, replaced by a quiet understanding of the remarkable role he'd played in saving 7 lives. "Mrs. Martinez?" Dr. Chen appeared in the doorway, smiling warmly. "Ready for our session?" As they settled into Dr. Chen's office, Marcus immediately began talking about his special hearing, a gift that he now understood rather than feared. "Dr. Chen, Mum says I helped save a whole family because I could hear them when nobody else could," Marcus said, his 8-year-old voice filled with pride rather than anxiety. "She says my ears work differently than other people's ears." Dr. Chen nodded, looking at the comprehensive hearing test results that had been completed the week before. "That's exactly right, Marcus. You have what we call exceptional auditory sensitivity. Your ears can detect sounds at frequencies and volumes that most people cannot hear. Like a superpower? Very much like a superpower. And you use that superpower to help people who really needed it." Sarah watched her son process this information with the resilience that children possessed. What had been a source of terror and confusion had transformed into something he could be proud of, a unique ability that had saved lives. After the session, Sarah and Marcus drove to a different part of Phoenix, to a rehabilitation facility where the Hendricks family was recovering from their 3-year ordeal. The meeting had been arranged through Detective Santos, who felt it was important for Marcus to see the real people behind the voices he'd heard. Michael Hendricks was thinner than he appeared in the old photographs Sarah had found, his hair now completely grey and his eyes bearing the weight of unimaginable experiences. But when he saw Marcus walk into the family visiting room, his face lit up with a smile that transformed his entire appearance. "Marcus," he said, kneeling down to the boy's eye level, "I am so happy to meet you." Marcus was suddenly shy, hiding partially behind Sarah's legs. "Are you the dad from the Sad family?" "I was the dad from the Sad family, but thanks to you, we're not sad anymore. We're the grateful family now." Jennifer Hendricks appeared in the doorway, moving slowly but with obvious determination. She was accompanied by Emma and Tyler, now 9 and 7 years old, who had grown during their captivity but still retained the resilience of childhood. The reunion was emotional but carefully managed by the facility's therapists. Emma and Tyler were curious about Marcus, asking him dozens of questions about how he'd been able to hear their parents' voices. Marcus, gaining confidence, explained about his special hearing and how the voices had come through the television. "We tried so hard to call for help," Emma said seriously. "Daddy said someone would hear us eventually, but it took so long." "I heard you," Marcus replied simply, "and my mom helped me tell the police where you were." Sarah spent an hour talking with Michael and Jennifer Hendricks about the technical aspects of the broadcasting system Michael had created. Even after 3 years of captivity, Michael's expertise in audio engineering was evident as he explained how he'd designed the relay system. "I built it as insurance," Michael said. "I knew my investigation into Russo's operation was dangerous, so I created a backup plan. If anything happened to my family, we could still communicate with the outside world." "But how did you access the broadcasting equipment while you were being held?" Sarah asked. "Russo was using us," Jennifer explained, her voice still weak but steady. "He needed Michael's technical skills to maintain his illegal broadcasting network. Michael was forced to work on radio equipment in the basement where we were held. He secretly modified some of that equipment to transmit our messages." Michael nodded. "Every time Russo made me work on his communication systems, I found ways to embed our emergency broadcasts into the signals. The messages were hidden in frequencies that his equipment wouldn't detect, but that my home relay system would amplify and rebroadcast." Sarah marveled at the ingenuity and determination it must have taken to maintain hope and keep broadcasting for 3 years. "What about the other prisoners, the 3 people who were rescued with you?" Michael's expression darkened. "Other people who had stumbled onto Russo's operation over the years. A private investigator who had been looking into some of Russo's properties. A journalist who had been investigating illegal broadcasting. A former employee who had tried to report suspicious activities. Russo couldn't risk letting any of us go." The scope of Vincent Russo's crimes was still being uncovered by investigators. What had started as illegal use of radio frequencies for criminal communications had evolved into a sophisticated operation involving money laundering, drug trafficking, and ultimately multiple kidnappings to silence anyone who might expose the network. Detective Santos later told Sarah that the evidence found in Michael's hidden broadcasting system, combined with the testimonies of the 7 rescued prisoners, had provided enough evidence to charge Russo and his associates with dozens of felonies. The case would likely result in life sentences for all involved, but for Sarah, the most important outcome was watching Marcus adjust to life without the constant stress of hearing desperate voices calling for help. 2 months after the rescue, Sarah made the decision to have Michael's hidden broadcasting equipment professionally removed from their house. The system had served its purpose, and Marcus needed to live in a home where he could watch television and listen to music without being reminded of the trauma he'd experienced. The removal process was supervised by the FBI's Technical Crimes Unit, who wanted to study Michael's system for potential applications in future missing persons cases. What they found was a broadcasting network so sophisticated that it could serve as a model for emergency communication systems. Mrs. Martinez, the lead FBI technician, told Sarah as they finished the removal process, "What Mr. Hendricks created here is remarkable. This system could revolutionize how we approach missing persons cases and emergency communications." As the last of the equipment was carefully packed and removed, Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Their house could finally just be a home. That evening, for the first time since they'd moved in, Sarah and Marcus sat together in the living room and turned on the television. Marcus settled beside her on the couch, no longer tense with anticipation of hearing desperate voices. They watched a nature documentary about whales, and when the narrator mentioned how whales communicate across vast distances through sounds that humans can barely detect, Marcus looked up at his mother with a knowing smile. "Kind of like how I could hear the sad family, right, Mum?" "Exactly like that, sweetheart. You have a special gift." 3 months later, Sarah received a letter from Jennifer Hendricks, who was now living with her family in a new city, starting over after their ordeal. The letter included a photograph of Emma and Tyler playing in a backyard, laughing and running like normal children again. "Dear Sarah and Marcus," the letter read, "I wanted you to know that we think about you every day. Marcus's ability to hear us when no one else could literally saved our lives. Emma and Tyler are in school now and doing well. Michael is working with law enforcement agencies to help improve emergency communication systems. We will never forget what you did for us. Thank you for listening when no one else could hear us. Thank you for not giving up when our situation seemed impossible. And thank you for raising a little boy brave enough to help strangers in need. With all our love and gratitude, the Hendricks family." Sarah read the letter to Marcus, who listened with the serious attention he gave to important things. "Mom," he said when she finished reading, "do you think there are other families out there who need help? Other voices that people can't hear?" Sarah looked at her son, this remarkable little boy who had turned a terrifying experience into something that saved lives. "Maybe there are, sweetheart, but if there are, I think the right person will hear them when the time comes." Marcus nodded solemnly. "And if I ever hear voices again, I'll tell you right away so we can help them too." Sarah pulled her son close, marveling at his resilience and compassion. What had started as a nightmare in their new home had ultimately revealed something extraordinary, not just about Marcus's unique abilities, but about the power of listening to people who desperately need to be heard. 6 months after the rescue, Sarah received a call from Detective Santos with an update that brought the case full circle. "Sarah, I wanted you to know that Vincent Russo was sentenced today. Life in prison without parole, along with his 2 associates. The judge specifically mentioned Marcus's role in breaking the case during the sentencing. How are the Hendricks doing?" "They're doing well. Michael has actually started working as a consultant for the FBI, helping them develop better communication systems for emergency situations. His experience has been invaluable." After she hung up, Sarah found Marcus in his room, building an elaborate Lego castle while listening to music on a small radio, something that would have been impossible just months earlier. "Marcus," Detective Santos called. "The bad man who hurt the Hendricks family is going to prison forever." Marcus looked up from his Legos. "Good. That means no other families will get hurt like they did." "That's right. And you know what? Mr. Hendricks is now helping other people by using what he learned to make better ways for people to call for help." Marcus smiled. "So even the sad parts turned into something good." Sarah sat on the edge of his bed, amazed once again by her son's ability to find meaning in difficult experiences. Yes, sweetheart, sometimes the hardest things we go through end up helping other people in ways we never expected. That night, as Sarah tucked Marcus into bed, he asked the question that had been on her mind as well. Mom, do you think we were supposed to move into that house? Like, do you think it was meant to happen so I could hear the voices? Sarah considered the question carefully. The rational part of her knew that their move to the Hendricks' former home had been a coincidence, the result of timing, finances, and availability. But looking at the chain of events that had led to 7 people being rescued from 3 years of captivity, it was hard not to see something more meaningful at work. I think, she said finally, that sometimes the most important things happen when we're just trying to do our best with difficult situations. You were scared and confused by the voices, but you were also brave enough to tell me about them. That bravery saved lives. Marcus nodded sleepily. I'm glad we moved here, even though it was scary at first. Me too, sweetheart, me too. As Sarah turned off the light and closed Marcus's bedroom door, she reflected on how much their lives had changed. They'd moved to Phoenix, seeking a fresh start after David's death, looking for a place where they could heal and build new memories. What they'd found instead was a mystery that tested their courage, revealed Marcus's extraordinary abilities, and ultimately led to one of the most significant rescue operations in Phoenix police history. The house that had seemed haunted by desperate voices was now quiet and peaceful. The television that had been a source of terror was now just a television. And Marcus, who had started as a frightened little boy, overwhelmed by sounds only he could hear, had become a confident child who understood that his differences could be a gift to others. 7 months after the rescue, Sarah received one final piece of correspondence related to the case. It was an official letter from the Phoenix Police Department informing her that Marcus would be receiving a civilian commendation for his role in solving the case. The ceremony was small and private, attended by Detective Santos, Dr. Chen, and a few other officials involved in the case. When the police chief presented Marcus with a certificate recognizing his exceptional service to the community through unique observational abilities, Marcus accepted it with the seriousness of someone much older. Marcus, the police chief said, your ability to hear what others couldn't hear saved 7 lives and brought dangerous criminals to justice. You should be very proud of what you've accomplished. Marcus looked up at the police chief with wide eyes. I just told my mom what I heard. She's the one who figured out how to help them. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes as she watched her son deflect credit, while simultaneously demonstrating the empathy and humility that had made him so determined to help the voices he'd heard. After the ceremony, as they drove home through the Phoenix streets, Marcus was quiet for a long time. Finally, he spoke up from the back seat. Mom, I understand now why I could hear the voices when other people couldn't. Why's that, sweetheart? Because sometimes people who are different are the only ones who can help. Like if everyone heard the same things, maybe nobody would notice when something was wrong. Sarah smiled, once again amazed by her son's wisdom. That's a very smart way to think about it, Marcus. And now the Hendricks family gets to be happy again, and other families won't get hurt by the bad man, and Mr. Hendricks gets to help more people with his inventions. That's right, all because you were brave enough to listen and tell someone what you heard. As they pulled into their driveway, the same driveway where the Hendricks family had disappeared 3 years earlier, Sarah felt a profound sense of closure. Their house was no longer the site of an unsolved mystery. It was simply home. That evening, Sarah and Marcus sat together on their couch watching a cooking show on the television that had once been a source of terror. Marcus was relaxed and happy, occasionally commenting on the recipes they were watching. During a commercial break, he looked up at his mother with a thoughtful expression. Mom, do you think Dad would be proud of us for helping the sad family? Sarah felt her heart constrict with love and loss. David had been gone for over a year now, but Marcus still thought of him regularly, especially during moments of significance. I think Dad would be incredibly proud of both of us, she said, pulling Marcus closer. He always said that the most important thing in life was helping people when they needed it, and that's exactly what we did. Marcus nodded, satisfied with this answer. They returned to watching their cooking show, 2 people who had survived loss and fear and emerged stronger, more connected and more aware of their ability to make a difference in the world. The voices that had once filled their house with desperate pleas for help were silent now, replaced by the normal sounds of a family building a life together. But Sarah would never forget the lesson those voices had taught her, that sometimes the most important communications come from the most unexpected sources, and that listening, really listening, could be the difference between hope and despair for people in desperate need. Marcus's exceptional hearing had been a gift that saved 7 lives. But more than that, it had shown both of them that their differences, rather than being sources of fear or shame, could be the very tools they needed to help others and find meaning in their own lives. In the end, the boy who screamed when the TV turned on had become the boy who saved a family by listening to voices that no one else could hear. And in a house that had once echoed with desperate cries for help, there was finally peace.